Okay, calm down.
You stand out to me among people with your political view as someone who actually believes that the two-state solution is possible. What would a two-state settlement look like?
Well, I think there is only one two-state settlement that could be implemented, and that would reflect the international consensus of a comprehensive Israeli withdrawal to the 1967 boundaries that would include the dismantling of all Jewish settlements in the occupied territories, and a just resolution of the refugee question. And that would then produce normalization agreements between Israel and the Arab world. I know we don't have much time left. I make the argument that a two state settlement remains a viable option in terms of being able to actually implement it. And I give the example, for example, of Algeria, which was much more heavily colonized by the French than have been the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And more importantly, its annexation was recognized internationally. Algeria was not considered an occupied territory or a foreign colony. It was considered an integral part of France in 1954. And if at the beginning of the Algerian War of Independence in 1954, if the night before you would have said Algeria is going to be independent in another 8 years, people would have sent you to have your for a mental exam, because that's how absurd it would have seemed at the time. And without getting into too much detail, I make the case that an Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories in a two-state settlement, that it is ultimately a question of political will, because there really is no point of return short of genocide, where you can say, well, you can no longer extract Israel from the occupied territories. But I would also add that I have recently added what I think is a crucial caveat to that, which is that, okay, a two-state settlement as a matter of practicality can still be implemented. The issue is, should it, when you see that Israel has become a fundamentally irrational state, a state that can no longer distinguish between friend and foe, a state that seems addicted to mass violence and all the rest of it, then you begin to ask yourself another question. Okay, I do believe that everything that I've said about the ability to achieve a two-state settlement is still valid, but should it? And in this sense, you can think of other examples. You can think of Europe during the 1940s. Could there have been peace in Europe without dismantling the Nazi regime? And I think the answer is a clear no. If you look at Southeast Asia in the late 1970s, was the expulsion of the Americans from that region sufficient to establish peace? Or did it also require dismantling the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia and its key institutions? You look at South Africa in the 1990s. Could there have been genuine peace and stability in Southern Africa without dismantling the white minority regimes, first Rhodesia and then South Africa, transforming its key institutions? And I think the answer is a clear no. And I feel that we need to also have a very serious discussion that even if a two-state solution can be implemented, whether that will now be sufficient to establish peace in the Middle East, or whether we should rather be thinking about dismantling the regime that has caused so much violence and instability and insecurity in that region, and transforming its institutions. And I do need to make clear that I am talking about a regime and not a citizenry. which are two entirely different things. You can very easily dismantle and transform a state without expelling anybody.
Right. So it would be one state with equal rights.
I think that would be the next question. Okay, if you do that, what comes next? Americans now very much like to talk about the day after
Right.
in Gaza. I'm more concerned with first answering the question: is a Zionist regime fundamentally incompatible with peace and security in the Middle East? And if it is, then the question that you asked me, can a two-state settlement still be achieved, becomes somewhat less relevant, because even if it is achieved and even if it is implemented, you still won't have peace and security in the Middle East.